There's a moment I keep coming back to, even now. My aunt's retirement party. A rented hall in Mississauga. The kind with fake wood paneling and folding chairs that wobble if you shift your weight wrong. Balloons in gold and white. A sheet cake from Costco that nobody ended up eating because it was too sweet. My mom at the microphone, laughing into it, the feedback squealing for a second before she tapped it and said, "Is this on?" And everyone laughed. She was doing a toast. For her sister, my Aunt Claudine, 32 years as an administrator at the school board, finally retiring at 61. It was supposed to be a nice evening. And for most people in that room, I think it was. She talked about Claudine growing up. The stories I'd heard 100 times. Then she talked about my older sister Renee, who was finishing her second year of law school at Western. She went on about Renee for almost 2 full minutes. How proud the family was. How Renee had always known what she wanted. How she was going to do something real with her life. Then someone at her table, I think it was my uncle, said something like, "What about your other one?" My mom laughed. Not a big laugh. Just a quick, loose sound, like the question was easy to answer. She looked out at the tables, found me, and said into the microphone, "Oh, Marguerite's still figuring it out. She's always been the one who needs a bit more time." The room didn't roar. It wasn't dramatic. A few people chuckled politely. My aunt smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. And then my mom moved on, raised her glass, said something about Claudine's garden. I sat there with my hands in my lap. I was 24. I had been working full-time for 2 years at a nonprofit in Hamilton, managing community outreach for a housing program. I had my own apartment, split with one roommate, a 15-minute walk from the Joe station. I was paying my own bills. I was not, by any reasonable measure, someone who needed a bit more time. But that's not the part that got me. The part that got me was that nobody at my table said anything. Not my cousin, not my dad, who was sitting 3 seats down and looked at his phone immediately after. Not my Aunt Claudine, whose party it was. The moment just dissolved, like it hadn't happened, and someone refilled the water pitcher and my uncle started talking about whether the Leafs had any shot this year. I drove home alone that night. I had come separately because I'd known, the way you know things about your own family after 24 years, that I'd want to be able to leave when I needed to. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my building for probably 20 minutes. Not crying. Just sitting. I thought about all the times before that. The Christmas when Renee got the laptop and I got a gift card to Chapters that was loaded with $40 instead of the 100 my mom had said. The way my dad introduced us at his work events. "This is Renee, she's pre-law," and then, gesturing vaguely, "and Marguerite." The university application conversations, when my mom kept asking me why I wasn't going somewhere with a better reputation, somewhere like where Renee had gone, instead of the social work program I'd gotten into at McMaster, which she consistently called that community college thing. I wasn't a difficult kid. I wasn't the one who skipped school or got in trouble. I just wasn't Renee. And somewhere along the way, my family had decided that not being Renee was its own kind of failure. That night in the parking lot, I made a decision. Not a dramatic one. I didn't send a message. I didn't call anyone. I just decided, very quietly, that I was done performing for people who had already decided what I was worth. I stopped reaching out first. I stopped showing up to things I hadn't specifically been asked to come to. I responded to group chats with short answers, and then went back to my life. When my mom called, I picked up, maybe 1 in 3 times. When she left voicemails, I listened to them eventually, answered the practical parts if there were any, and let the rest go. It wasn't a dramatic exit, it was more like a slow exhale. Nobody noticed right away. That, maybe more than anything, told me what I needed to know. The next few years, honestly, they were some of the better ones of my life. I got promoted at the nonprofit 18 months in. I was managing a team of 4 by the time I was 26. The work was hard and underfunded, and sometimes I went home exhausted in a way that sat behind my eyes. But I cared about it. I was good at it. My director, a woman who had spent 30 years in housing advocacy and did not give compliments casually, told me in my annual review that I had one of the strongest instincts for community trust building she'd seen in a junior staff member. I kept that in a note on my phone for a while. I started running. Nothing serious, just the waterfront trail in the evenings, 30 minutes at a time that eventually turned into an hour. I adopted a cat named Berard after Berard Inlet because I'd done a work trip to Vancouver that year and loved it. And she was terrible and perfect. I made friends at work, real ones, and we had the kind of friendship where you could call at 9 on a Tuesday and say, "I'm having a rough one," and someone would say, "Come over, I have wine and leftover Thai." My sister and I had never been close, but we had a kind of surface civility that I maintained mostly for logistics. She texted occasionally. I replied. We didn't have a falling out. There was just nothing there. My dad texted on my birthday. My mom called. I answered that one. "You've been so hard to get a hold of," she said. "I've been busy," I said. "Work has been a lot." She accepted that. She talked about Renee's articling position for 10 minutes, and then said she should let me go and that she'd send a card. The card arrived 2 weeks later. It had a check in it for $50 and a post-it that said, "Hope you're well. Love, Mom and Dad." Renee had gotten a weekend trip to Montreal for her birthday that year. I knew because my mom had posted about it. I didn't let myself be angry about it anymore. I just noticed it and filed it and kept going. By the time I was 28, I had moved into my own place. A one-bedroom in the west end of Hamilton, old building, tall ceilings, a clawfoot tub that I had specifically chosen the apartment for. I had a promotion that came with an actual benefits package and a small but real raise. I had a life I had built from scratch, with my own hands, with people who had chosen me back. My family became something I thought about less and less. Not with bitterness, not anymore. More like a house you used to live in. You remember the floor plan, you know it well, but you don't live there. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I was at my desk finishing a report. My phone screen lit up, and it was my dad's number, which was unusual. He almost never called. It was always my mom. I let it ring through, thought I'd call back later. But then it rang again immediately. I picked up. He sounded different. Smaller somehow. My dad is the kind of man who fills a room when he walks into it. Or at least he always has been. The one who tells the same 3 jokes at every family event and laughs the loudest at all of them. This wasn't that voice. "Marguerite," he said. "It's your sister." I felt something go very still in my chest. Renee had been in a car accident. She was okay. He said that right away. She's okay, she's stable. But she had broken her left arm in 2 places and had a significant concussion and had been kept overnight for observation. She was being discharged in the morning, but she wasn't going to be able to work for at least 6 weeks, possibly longer. She had a caseload of clients. She had a lease renewal coming up. She was, apparently, not doing well emotionally. He told me all of this. I listened. Then he said, "We were thinking maybe you could come and help out for a bit, just until she's on her feet." I was quiet for a moment. "What would that look like?" I said. "Just, helping her manage things. She needs someone around. Your mother and I can't get there. You know your mom's hip. And I can't leave the business right now." He paused. "You're closer. And you're more flexible with your job." There it was. More flexible. He meant, your job isn't as important. He meant, you have more time because what you do matters less. He meant all the things he'd always meant, just wrapped a little differently. I sat with it for a second. I thought about the retirement party. I thought about $40 birthday checks and the word "figuring it out" spoken into a microphone in front of 60 people. I thought about 4 years of being largely left alone, which had also been 4 years of building something I was actually proud of. Dad, I said, I have a job. I have a team I'm responsible for. I can't just take 6 weeks off. I'm not asking for 6 weeks, he said, his voice getting a little firmer. Just a couple of weeks. To get her settled. Renee lives in Toronto. That's not a short commute from where I am. You could stay at her place. I looked at the wall of my office. A corkboard with pushpins and a sticky note that said finish OCHAP report by Friday in my own handwriting. I'll think about it, I said. I did not think about it. I called Renee directly that evening. She sounded tired and a little foggy, which I understood. Concussions do that. We talked for about half an hour. I asked what she actually needed in the practical, immediate sense. She said she couldn't really use her left arm, so cooking was hard. And she had a couple of deadlines she was going to have to get extensions on. And she was scared to be alone at night, but didn't want to admit that to our parents. I told her I'd look into grocery delivery services that could get set up quickly in her area. I told her I'd help her draft the email to her articling supervisor, asking for an extension. Because I had written 100 of those kinds of difficult professional emails over the years, and I knew how to do it without making her look flaky. I told her that if she needed someone to come for a weekend, I could probably do one weekend in the next 2 weeks. That's not what Mom said you were going to do, she said. Mom doesn't decide what I'm going to do, I said. There was a pause. It wasn't hostile. It was more like she was recalibrating. That's fair, she said, quietly. I spent the next hour setting up an Instacart subscription linked to her address with a first delivery of the thing she'd told me she needed. Easy to prep food, soup, some frozen meals from a place she liked, Tylenol, the specific chamomile tea she drank when she was stressed. I texted her the confirmation, and she replied with a string of lowercase thank yous that sounded more like her than anything in the phone call had. My mom called the next morning. Your father said you were going to think about it. I thought about it, I said. I can't take time off work. I helped Renee set up grocery delivery and I'm going to help her draft her extension request. I can do one weekend visit. That's not enough, my mom said. She needs family. You and Dad are her family too. Your father's business, Mom, I said. I know. But I also have a job. It's not a flexible one. I manage a team. I have deliverables. I can't pick up and leave for weeks because it's less inconvenient for me than it is for you. She was quiet. You've always been like this, she said, and her voice had that particular quality it gets when she's disappointed in me. The one I used to try so hard to fix. Even when we need you, you make it about yourself. I took a breath. For a long time, a version of me would have crumbled at that line, would have apologized, would have rearranged my life to make the feeling in her voice go away. I love Renee, I said. I'm doing what I can, but I'm not dropping my life because you and Dad find it inconvenient to do yours. She hung up before I finished the sentence. My dad texted that evening, your mother is very upset. I texted back, I know. I'm sorry she's upset. I meant what I said. He didn't reply. The weekend I went to Renee's, I wasn't sure what to expect. We'd never spent real time alone together, just the two of us, without the gravitational pull of our parents arranging everything around her. I brought groceries, the stuff I knew she actually liked, and I made a big pot of soup on the Saturday afternoon that she could reheat for the week. She sat at the kitchen island while I cooked, and we talked in a way I don't think we ever had. She told me she was exhausted, not from the accident, or not just from it, from the pace of her life, from how much she'd spent the last 6 years chasing a version of success that felt like it was always someone else's definition. She'd gotten into law because our parents expected it. She'd chosen corporate because that's what you did at her school, and she'd been too tired to figure out what she actually wanted. "I keep thinking about the retirement party," she said, out of nowhere. I turned from the stove. "What Mom said," into the microphone. She looked at her tea. I was sitting right there. I didn't say anything. "I know. I should have," she said. "You had just started at the nonprofit. You were literally doing housing advocacy. That's not nothing." "No," I said. "It's not." We were quiet for a bit. The soup bubbled. Berard, who I'd brought because I wasn't comfortable leaving her alone for a weekend, sat on the windowsill and ignored us entirely. Which was appropriate. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything," Renee said. I thought about whether to say, "It's okay." Because it's what you say. Because that's the easy answer that makes the air lighter. But it wasn't entirely okay, and we both knew it. And I thought maybe we were old enough to let that be true without it destroying anything. "I know you are," I said instead. "I know." She got her extension. She healed. Over the following weeks, we texted more than we ever had. Small things, checking in. The kind of thread that hums along in the background of your day. It wasn't a movie moment. She didn't transform overnight. I didn't either. But something between us shifted into something that felt, for the first time, like it was actually ours. My parents and I have a strange arrangement now. My mom calls every 2 or 3 weeks. We talk about surface things. Sometimes she asks about work and I tell her a bit. She's never said anything about the conversation we had when Renee was hurt, and I've stopped waiting for her to. My dad and I exchange texts occasionally. Hockey, usually, because it's neutral ground. I go home for Christmas, one day, dinner, and then I leave. It's functional. It's not warm. I don't think it's going to become warm. I used to grieve that. In my early 20s, there was a version of me that kept hoping for a conversation that would reset everything. Some moment where my mom would say, "I see you," and mean it, and the whole shape of things would change. I spent a lot of energy on that hope, more than I should have. I don't wait for it anymore. What I have instead? A job that matters, a team that trusts me, a cat who occasionally sleeps on my feet, a sister I'm actually getting to know, and a clawfoot tub that I fill on Friday evenings with lavender salts, and a podcast I like. Last month, I got a message from a younger woman at my organization. She's 22, new to the team, still figuring out how nonprofit work differs from what she thought it would be. She said she'd been watching how I handled a difficult funding conversation with a city contact, and she wanted to know how I stayed calm. I thought about it for a second before I replied. I told her, "You learn that you can't control what people decide to think about you. You can only control what you actually do. So you stop performing for the audience that's already decided. And you just do the work. You be good at it. Not to prove anything to them. Because it matters. And because you're capable. And because you don't need their version of you to be true." She sent back 3 thumbs up, and then asked if I had time to grab coffee and talk through the funding thing more. I said yes. I said yes easily, the way I do most things now. I've thought a lot about what it actually means when someone tells you who you are before you've had the chance to show them. My mom didn't say anything cruel that night, not by her own measure. She probably doesn't even remember the exact words. But I remember them. I remember the way the microphone carried her voice across that whole room, and the way the laughter that followed wasn't mean. It was just easy. That's the part that stayed with me longest. How easy it was for everyone to let it pass. What I've come to understand is that the people who define you without knowing you aren't usually doing it out of hatred. They do it out of habit. They have a picture in their head, one they built a long time ago, and they keep updating everything else in the world except that picture. My mom had decided what I was at some point in my childhood, maybe when Renee got her first gold star and I got a needs improvement, and she never really looked again. That's not a villainous thing. It's a human thing. But it still costs you something if you let it run your life. For years I let it. Not in obvious ways. I wasn't out here begging for her approval, not consciously. But I was calibrating myself to her. Explaining my job in ways I thought she'd find legible. Shrinking what I'd built so it didn't seem like a challenge to her version of things. When she called Renee's articling position the real achievement in the family, I'd tell myself it didn't bother me. And that was a lie I told so smoothly I almost believed it. The retirement party cracked something open. Not in a dramatic way. It was more like the hairline fracture that was always there finally became visible. And instead of trying to patch it, I just stopped. I stopped reaching. I stopped explaining. I stopped waiting for a revised verdict. What happened when I stopped is the part nobody tells you about. You assume there will be a confrontation or a loss so sharp you'll feel it like a physical thing. Instead, there was just space. And in that space, I built the actual version of my life, without anyone's framework around it. The call about Renee was a test of that, I think. Not a test anyone designed. Just the kind that life throws when it wants to know whether you've actually changed, or just gotten quieter about the old patterns. My dad said, "You are more flexible." And what he meant, without knowing he meant it, was, your life matters less, so you can rearrange it for hours. That used to be a sentence that would have sent me packing a bag. Instead, I said no to what wasn't mine to carry, and yes to what actually was. I helped Renee in real practical ways. I showed up for a weekend. I made soup. I helped her write an email that got her the extension she needed. None of it required me to disappear into someone else's idea of my role. Renee said sorry eventually, for the party, for staying silent, and I didn't tell her it was fine, because it wasn't entirely. But I also didn't need it to be. Some things happened, and they shaped who you became. And the goal isn't to undo them. It's to know what you're carrying and put down what was never yours. What I know now is this. The life you build in the quiet. The one nobody applauds. The one you make out of your own choices and your own values with your own two hands. That's the one that holds. Not because the universe rewards the patient. Just because it's real. You made it. It fits you, and nobody can announce it away at a party.